I think the natural world is absolutely amazing. The good thing about science is that you can find things out about the natural world.
Oh, there's one.
Oh, yeah. And sometimes I think it's like we're on the edge of a huge new continent, like the discovery of America. We've got to chart our way across this amazing territory, and we're going to find brilliant new things that nobody's ever seen before. And this has to be exciting.
Sir Paul Nurse's work has taken him on an ambitious quest, nothing less than discovering the nature of life itself.
If you think about living things and non-living things, what's an important distinguishing feature is that living things can all reproduce. They can make copies of themselves. And so what I thought was, if we could understand how that process worked, how it was controlled, then we'd be getting really to the core of the reproductive process itself. And that's really central to understanding what a living thing is.
Before he started looking down a microscope, Paul was studying the sky. His fascination with science began at the dawn of the space age.
Russian scientists have today launched a second space satellite. The satellite, Sputnik 2, has on board a small dog named Laika to test whether it will be possible for man to survive in space. The new satellite will be visible over London this evening.
I was only 8 or 9 years of age, and I heard on the radio that this satellite, which was only the second one sent up by the Russians in 1957-58, was going over London. And I got enormously excited by the prospect of seeing something made by human beings going round over London 120 miles out in outer space. And so I went out into my front garden, because it was going to be in the southwestern part of the sky, and I looked up, and there, sure enough, just on time, was this star moving across the sky. I was really so impressed that human beings could send up this satellite. So I ran down the street following it, telling everybody I saw what it was. They thought I was mad, of course, but I just thought everybody had to know about this. There's something about me that obviously likes using instruments to expand what I can see. I use microscopes to look at microorganisms, things that are very small. Telescopes, like this one here, to look at objects a long, long way away. So it's obviously something about my nature that wants to expand my normal experiences into the very small and the very large.
But Paul's work took him into the world of the very small. To find out more about living processes, he decided to study one of the smallest organisms on the planet. Because of the success of his work, Paul has been knighted and is now in charge of the Imperial Cancer Research Fund, where he splits his time between running the organisation and doing cutting-edge research.
Morning, Liz.
Hello, Paul. How are you?
I'm fine, how are you?
Fine, thank you.
Jolly good. Were the trains okay today?
Terrible as usual.
Excellent. This is my office. I work on cancer research, and this is my laboratory.
Paul works with a team of top international research scientists who have some of the latest technology at their disposal. All this is at Paul's fingertips to help him look at the reproduction process of the tiny organism he's been studying for the last 25 years, yeast. So why is it important for us to know how a yeast cell reproduces itself?
Well, the reason you should be interested in it is that every one of the billion cells that make up your body is controlled by exactly the same sort of gene that was discovered in yeast. In fact, we can take the gene out of you and put it into yeast, and it will substitute perfectly well for the yeast gene, even though yeasts and ourselves have diverged in evolutionary terms 1,000 million years ago.
This meant that Paul could study human genetics in a yeast cell. A very simple organism, yeast reproduces rapidly and is much easier to study than a human being. Even more important was the connection with cancer. Paul found he could use yeast to simulate how cancer cells divide and grow into a tumour.
Diseases such as cancer are really tied up with this cell division process, because it's when that process goes wrong that we get cancer. And so it's very important to understand that process if we're going to think sensibly about how to treat and prevent cancer.
Paul's latest work is looking at strangely shaped forms of yeast, which is proving important in cancer research.
A cancer cell, to escape from the tissue in which it's found, has got to reorganise itself so it's not confined by the other cells, creep past them and to get away from the tissue. And how that happens, we really have no idea.
So what is it you found then in your cells?
Well, what we've done is looked for mutants, which quite simply have funny shapes. So we've treated our yeast cells with this agent that damages DNA, damages the genes, and then looked amongst them for cells that just look funny. Now we've decided to focus on one particular problem, and that is how the yeast cell grows in a straight line. That is, how is this end kept completely opposite to this end? And that's defective here, where obviously that's not happening, or here, where you get another end growing here. If you look, for example, here, I have a pre-prepared model to show you. This sausage of Play-Doh that you see here is the normal shape of the cell. But if it can't grow in a straight line like this, then what will happen is it can become bent, either curved, like that, or maybe just simply a sharp bend, like that, because this end has no idea what this end is doing. It can't communicate. When it goes really wrong, then it will start growing out in the middle here, and we'll get something looking like one of these T-shaped cells, because it's now growing out here as well as growing out here. And obviously if the whole thing goes wrong, then, you know, it just gets all scrunched up, and what we end up with is a ball, just like this. So you can see how, just looking at this Play-Doh here, the same sorts of things are happening inside the cells.
If Paul and his team can find out how cells change their shape, he may get a step closer to understanding how cancer can move around the body. Cancer occurs when damaged cells in the body start to divide out of control, creating a tumour. It's one of the most lethal diseases in Britain today. 1 in 3 people will suffer from cancer in their lifetime, and 1 in 4 will die of it. Paul knows from personal experience how devastating a disease cancer can be. He's met up for a drink with his old friend Keith Palmer, who's recently recovered from leukemia, cancer of the blood.
Paul came very regularly to the hospital, and he sat and had the indignity of sitting by my bedside whilst I was throwing up all over the place, because we do a lot of that. And I wasn't embarrassed or anything about it, so he was tremendously one of the people, together with my wife, who were tremendously sort of helpful about getting through the thing.
Was Keith the first person you actually knew really well who developed cancer?
He was the first person I knew well, and that was a very disturbing experience, really, because I'd thought about the disease a lot, but it was really theoretical. You know, this is an interesting problem. You're not involved in it. But, you know, when a friend gets ill, it's completely different. You get completely involved in it in a different sort of way. So, yes, he was.
Keith and Paul go back a long way. Keith remembers vividly the occasion of one of Paul's greatest discoveries.
He was glowing with excitement, and what he explained to me was that he caused cell division in frogs using the genes from yeast. And this meant that all the things that he'd been studying in this very simple yeast organism were applicable to frogs, and therefore the obvious leap that potentially to humans as well.
It was absolutely fantastic. I have to say, it was one of the more exciting moments in my scientific life, because I'd worked on yeast for many years, and nobody was really interested in yeast, so they weren't interested in what I did. It's good for drinking and making beer, and also for bread. And then suddenly, fantastically, it looked as if this work was going to be relevant to every other living thing. I mean, frogs were the start, but then humans after that. So I was enormously excited. I still get excited about it when I think about it.
Is that also when you realise it might be relevant to cancer as well?
It was. Then I realised, because cell division is the basis of cancer, that knowing how cells control their division is really important for understanding cancer, and I was right in the middle of all of that. So I realised at that point that it could be interesting, could even be important for understanding cancer and maybe even developing new treatments for cancer.
If you can actually figure out the cell division mechanism, figure out what's gone wrong, there's the potential for actual cure rather than just sort of bombarding the body with poisons. And it's well worth the effort, I can tell you, if you've gone through the poisoning process to look for a better way.
So you're completely better now?
I'm completely better now. Rather less hair than I used to have, but apart from that, yes, I'm completely recovered.
Actually, his hair wasn't very good in the first place, so it's not such a change.
Paul's work didn't contribute to Keith's cure, but it has helped him understand how the disease works. Because of this knowledge, it'll be possible to develop far better treatments for the future. Paul's work is so highly thought of that he's invited to conferences all over the world. His research into cell division has earned him numerous international awards, and recently he was even knighted.
I think awards can be a bit of a funny business because science is a social activity where you rely on very many other people. But of course it's nice to get visits abroad and be feted in that sort of way. But you have to be a bit careful about prizes.
What's it like to be knighted?
Well, that was a surprise too, but at least I didn't lose my ear when the sword came down. It is interesting to contemplate an entangled bank, clothed with many plants of many kinds, with birds singing on the bushes, with various insects flitting about, and with worms crawling through the damp earth, and to reflect that these elaborately constructed forms, so different from each other and dependent on each other in such a complex manner, have all been produced by laws acting around us, and that whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved. My scientific hero is Charles Darwin, and he lived for many years here at Down House on the outskirts of London. And he was a very interesting man, a great scientist, a great naturalist, interested in the great wide range of living things. And you can see here in his greenhouse some of the plants that he would have been interested in. We see here a plant that eats insects because it's short of nitrogen. And he carried out experiments and worked here for many years. But the main thing he was interested in was the wide diversity of life. You can see that here, all these plants, such a huge variety of plants, animals and insects that make up the living world. Because Darwin had two of the characteristics that all great scientists have. He was intensely curious. He was interested in all the things around him. And not only was he intensely curious, but he wanted to ask the important question. Where did all this wonderful range of living things come from? Where did all these plants, where did all the different species of birds and insects, how did they all arise? And he came up with this beautiful idea, one of the greatest ideas, if not the greatest ideas, in the whole of biology. And that is the origin of species by natural selection. All plants and all animals, they all show variations. And if those variations are useful to the organism for their survival and their reproduction, then they will be selected for, and they will pass on their genes, which encode those characteristics, to their offspring, to the children that they produce if they're human beings, or to the plants and animals that are produced when they breed. And this is the way that evolution works. And it was Darwin's great idea. Darwin wasn't only a naturalist. He didn't only observe animals and plants. He also did experiments. He was a great experimentalist. The great thing about Darwin's experiments is that they were really so simple. Anybody could do them. He just watched the plants, investigated the insects, just did really simple sorts of experiments. You know, if you look at these flowers here, you could ask how well do they grow in the sun or in the shade? That's a very simple thing to do, but you can discover something about the world about you. You know, biologists really have a big advantage here because they can study the world around them and really discover quite new things with really very simple experiments.
Paul's not the only scientist in the family. His passion is shared by his daughter Emily, who's studying theoretical physics. So did her father inspire her to go into science?
I'm not sure I was inspired. He definitely took an interest in my interest. Maybe I was, because he's so interested in his own work, and he really gets into it and spends so much of his time in it, and he really enjoys it, that maybe I sort of saw it as something that could actually be enjoyable if you're really interested in the subject, rather than just something at school where you're just learning what you're told to learn. So maybe I was, not consciously, but maybe subconsciously I was inspired by him.
Emily, as you can see, likes animals.
I do like animals, I just don't really want them to jump on me. That's all.
No, but there's absolutely no chance of one of these frogs jumping on you.
Perhaps father and daughter could start a family business.
I think that we need to draw into biology different sorts of disciplines, like physics, like maths, like chemistry, like information science. We want people like Emily who think about things more in a more abstract way to get involved with biologists like myself so that we can really have a fresh look at this problem. I mean, there's good reasons why we couldn't work together, partly because we're father and daughter, and Emily couldn't shout at me if we worked together.
I was quite interested in astrobiology actually for a while as well, trying to find life on other planets, which is a lot biology based, because I was doing astrophysics originally, and that's a bit that interested me, but I'm not really sure if you need sort of more biology qualifications to do that sort of thing, really. I need to look into it, but
I don't think you do actually, because I think if you're interested and able, you can learn anything you need to. I think that there's no need to worry about what specialised training you've had. No reason at all.
Well, I'm definitely going to look into it, but
you can do anything you want to do, in fact.
Looking for aliens.
Having found one in your father. Biology is really at the edge of a revolution as we go into this new century. We now know so much of the basic information, and we've got so many of the tools that we need to take it apart, that we can really begin to address the very big questions of biology. In particular, what is life itself? I mean, what do we mean by that? And understanding the processes that underlie life. It's a really exciting time because this is so important to us as human beings.
If I wanted to become you, what would I have to be good at school?
You don't have to be good, you just have to be curious.